Shalom, everyone. Chag Sameach, Moadim L'Simcha. Tonight we're going to take a section from the Haggadah and study it. It's a controversial section, and people try to find solutions, and even the solutions were controversial, we're going to see. So this is a late edition of the Haggadah. And what am I talking about? So let's look at the section is called Pour Your Wrath. And I'm asking, maybe we should change it to Pour Your Love.
Pour your love. No. To change, maybe we should say pour your love instead of pour your wrath.
Yes. Okay. So let's see what it's called in Hebrew. Shpokh. Who knows the next word?
Xamatcha.
Right.
El Hagoyim.
So here's a picture from the Haggadah of Prague. You see it, Shpokh Chamatcha. But now let's read the paragraph and we'll see why it's problematic. So let's go back to the seder. Let's reenact in our minds. We finished eating the meal. We said Birkat Ha-mazon. And just before we start the Hallel, there is this paragraph that begins with the words Shpokh Chamatcha el Hagoyim. In some Haggadahs, you'll see that at this point you fill Elijah's cup, but in other Haggadahs, this is not the point. So that's besides the point, the Elijah's cup. You'll see it has nothing to do with Elijah. It's not mentioning Elijah at all. So that's why I just put it in parentheses. But I'll read the Hebrew. Shpokh chamatcha el hagoyim asher lo yidaucha v'al mamlachot asher b'shimcha lo karau ki achal et Yaakov v'et naveu heshamu. Shpokh alehem zamecha v'choron apcha yasigem tirdof be'af v'tashmidem mitachat shmei Adonai. Do we have a volunteer to read the English? Anyone? Okay. Pour your wrath upon the nations that did not know you, and upon the kingdoms that did not call upon your name, since they have consumed.
I'd like to give the others a chance.
And laid. Somebody wants to read? Oh.
I'll read.
Okay.
All right. Pour out your wrath upon the nations that did not know you, and upon the kingdoms that did not call upon your name, since they have consumed Yaakov and laid waste his habitation. Pour out your fury upon them, and the fierceness of your anger shall reach them. You shall pursue them with anger and eradicate them from under the skies of Hashem.
Okay. So what is the problem? Do you feel there's any problem? First of all, who do you think composed this paragraph?
An angry person.
Yes, that is true. Do you think it's in the Mishnah, in the Talmud?
It's in the Psalms. It says
the verses. Okay, excellent point. So you see in small font, I showed you where these verses come from originally, but who compiled them into a paragraph? And by the way, in Italian version of the Haggadah, only the first verse. In Yemenite and Sephardi version, they added another fourth verse. So there's variations, but this is what most Ashkenazim have. So who compiled it and decided to insert it into the Haggadah? So you're right, Mother. Of course, this is very old. This is biblical verses, but who inserted it into the Haggadah? If we look at the Rambam, the Gaonim, the Haggadah of the Gaonim, nothing is there. If we look at the Haggadah of the Rambam, it's not there. If we look at the Haggadah of Rav Saadia Gaon, it's not there. And the answer is it's a medieval age edition. And the theory is that it was following the Crusades. After they suffered from such murderous atrocities by the Christians, all in the name of the God of love, then someone inserted it, and because it resonated with so many communities that were on the path of destruction of these crusaders, it became widespread. So do you find this paragraph problematic? If yes, why do you think it's problematic? If not, why not? I'd like to hear.
No, I don't, but I'll tell you later.
Yeah, go ahead.
Me. Yeah, earlier in the Seder, we have the Hisham Dala Votemi. Okay, and we know that's done very ceremoniously. We raised a cup of wine, cover the matzah. I think we stand up. So, and I think we know how that goes. It describes that not one person who rose against us, but in every generation there was somebody arising against the Jewish people. So, the one paragraph here, starting with Shpok Hamatcha from the collected verses, doesn't seem like an inappropriate response to evil and oppression and other destruction that was perpetrated against the Jewish people. So it has to be taken in context like that. That's my point of view. You asked.
And if you think that this is a problem in the Haggadah, you would have to say the same thing about much of the Torah, because we do talk about, slaughters and vengeance, and there's a lot of things. But again, as was just said, in context.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate. Isn't it better to wish for peace, for positive things, for no oppression, to wish for the same result, but without all this fury and eradicating and destroying?
In theory, yes. But what if the peace, I don't want to start talking about today's situation. If the peace buys time, but that time then causes more pain.
So it's emotional.
I don't know.
So
I don't have an answer.
I hear from you that it's emotional. It's an emotional response. It's not a rational response. Yes, we have the idea in Judaism that we don't want anybody slaughtered or killed. We'd love for all our enemies to do tshuva and to live peacefully with us. That's in theory, that's rationalizing, but this is written from an emotional feeling after seeing the massacres of the Crusades.
Yes, but Jemai, that's what bothers me about this. Instead of saying, pour out your wrath upon the nations that murdered us, that they're saying that, they're not giving the real reason, the real truth. They're saying, they're saying, pour out your wrath because they didn't know you.
Okay, that's a great point.
But the real reason is that they're angry because.
Okay, so we're going to see a commentator who talks about that. That's a great point. And we'll see the problems that he struggles with. He says, yeah, well, why is this? So they don't know your name. So they're not God-fearing, or they're not believers in God. That's a reason to pour your wrath on them? Very good point. So we're going to see that. So let's look at one here. Here he is, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, early 20th century scholar who wrote a commentary called Torah Tamima on the Torah, and he wrote a commentary on the Haggadah called Baruch She'amar, because his name was Baruch, so it's a play on the on the section from Baruch She'amar in the davening. So it's a little bit long, but it's worth it because he's struggling, and then I want to see what you think about his answer. At first glance, the anger expressed in this passage against the other nations. Do you see what I'm reading or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to understand. Against whom? And why do we ask God to pour out his wrath? One might say that this statement applies to anyone who is not Jewish, since the other nations do not truly know God, nor do they share our faith. Now you should add, however, the key to understanding this passage lies in the word asher. Asher lo yeda'ucha. This word can be translated in a variety of different ways, with different meanings. It can mean that God should pour out his wrath on those nations who don't know him, or it can mean God should pour out his wrath on all the nations because all of them do not know God. But still, that's not satisfactory, because he continues, yet how can the other nations of the world be held responsible for not knowing God, since they were not blessed with this gift? And then he comes to his main point, so I skipped a little bit, and he says, anyone to read this passage? Any volunteer?
Okay, not everyone is expected to be saintly. Yet the Torah assumes that a certain amount of fear of God is expected, even of the other nations. While the nations are not expected to follow all of God's laws, they are expected to recognize that the role that they play in the world is a product of God's will. Even when they persecute the Jews, it is only because God has allowed them to do so. Oy, I don't like that last line.
Oh, and if you don't like that, wait till you read this. Continue.
Okay. Similarly, when the Haggadah condemns the nations who do not know you, it suggests that nations believe that their success in persecuting Israel was a product of their own strength is what led to their condemnation. It is the second part of this passage that is the real reason for their punishment. Because they consumed Jacob and destroyed his dwelling place, the nations tried to destroy Israel with a vengeance rather than simply obeying God's will.
What do you think of his explanation? Let me summarize it. If all our persecutors would have said, we're doing this to you because God sent us to do, that's fine. That's God's will. Then we would not say this. We would not pour our wrath and so on. But they did more than necessary. They thought they're doing it because of their own strength, but really they didn't realize that God sent them. What do you think of that? In one sentence, in one word, it's absurd. It's actually a rationalization of evil, and it's
awful.
And I'm not, he's just one of the rabbis who lived in the 20th century. I don't think we have to feel such reverence simply because he wrote some famous commentary. He lived in a world, I can't really blame him because his education, he didn't study philosophy, he didn't study theology, so in his very narrow world, all our enemies, starting from the Babylonians, the Romans, the Nazis, they're all doing God's will, except they're crediting themselves instead of realizing it's God's will. That's rationalizing evil. No, God doesn't want them to do it. God doesn't want evil. So I think here you get to really a philosophy of what is God's involvement in the world. And I think, following my grandfather, who had a whole doctrine about this and wrote about it extensively, God is not involved in the world any more than God created human beings. He created it with possibility for good and evil. When people do evil, in that sense, it's God's doing because he created human beings. But God doesn't have a want at all. Even to say that God wants something is anthropomorphism. God doesn't have a want, doesn't have a desire. God doesn't want A to happen, nor does he not want B to happen. So all this talk about he wanted this event to happen, that's anthropomorphic. You're attributing to God things that you want or don't want. Once you disconnect God from the actual, God is not, the super president of the world. Human beings are. We have the capacity to do great things and good things and be good to each other, and we have the capacity to do terrible, horrible things to each other. And when that happens, it's only because we have that choice. And that is an idea that we find in Judaism, the idea of freedom of free choice, that everyone has free choice. The Babylonians, Pharaoh had, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Christians, the Crusaders, they had free choice. But, he comes from a position where, okay, there was terrible crusades, there must be a reason. God wanted this to happen. And I think it's dangerous. But conversely, the same goes for great things that happen. That's why I don't like all these statements. God is happy about the state of Israel. You don't know anything about God. So you can say, I am happy about the creation of the state of Israel. Don't say this is redemption. Don't say that's attributing to God or misattributing to God things that happen in the world because of human-made choices or man-made choices. Man makes those choices. He makes the choice to do either evil or to do good things. And once you do that, then you don't have a problem like he has, because he's in a conundrum here. He needs to explain these terrible things, and he believes that God is behind all of it. Okay.
So Shammai, if God isn't present in that way, then who decides or who decided what was good and what was evil?
So we have guidance in the Torah about moral things and about how to lead moral lives, and not just between ourselves, but also between ourselves and the other nations of the world, and love the stranger and So we need to extract from the
But
Torah.
that always, in the Torah, it always comes back to God. It's like, it's the same thing as it's the opposite of the philosophy that you can be a completely moral human being and be an atheist. And, that there's a great big discussion about that.
Yeah, it's interesting discussion because we're going to get to another paragraph that we're going to see instead of the Shpok Chamatcha, and that ties into the people who were righteous among the nations, especially during the Holocaust, and what motivated them. And some of them were motivated by religious feelings, but some, like you say, were atheists and simply were moral people and courageously hid Jews or helped them escape, and it had nothing to do with religion. So we have both. We have people can do good without any connection to religion, but I think we do want to hope that religion at least has some influence to bring out the good in people. And if you want to argue that it's not doing its job, I can agree with you on that. It's not doing its job today.
But Shammai, I think there are two possibilities for God in the world. One is the one that you're implying is that God created the world and then he left everything up to us, right?
Right.
But if you read in the Torah all the time, God says, I will you will, or your harvest will be great if you do this, and this, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Always the conditional contract.
Right. So that's the opposite of what you're saying.
So the Rambam talked about that at length, and basically, in a nutshell, he said that there's two levels of understanding of why we do the mitzvot. In the level that the masses, he called it, the one that we need to explain to the masses, that's the Torah writes that for them. You won't be able to, especially in ancient Israelite society, you won't be able to get to wean them off the idol worship, to all the moral terrible things that they would do to each other, how the power corrupts. You wouldn't be able to do that without promising rewards and threatening punishment and saying you will be destroyed and the enemies
And
will come.
Who said that? The Rambam?
Yeah. He
was an elitist.
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
He felt that on the highest level, the commandments and the avoidance of sin is disconnected from anything that happens in reality, from any actual events at the highest level. But he thought that most people, that's how he explained why you find so many texts in the Torah, but not in all of them. Like if you look at the V'ahavta, the Shema and the V'ahavta, there's no reward and punishment there. It only comes in the second paragraph of the Shema, V'hayim Shamua. And so I could do a whole lesson about that. My grandfather said
that would be good.
Yeah, those are the two levels. The first level, V'ahavta, right? If you remember when we say love God with all your soul, learn right, put on to fit. There's nothing about what you will get, nothing in that paragraph. So he had a whole philosophy about that. But I want to continue now about this paragraph. Rabbi Sachs has a very interesting take on it. He doesn't see it as violence. He gave us the context of it. I'll read quickly. This passage, not part of the earliest Haggadot, was added during the Middle Ages, during one of the darkest periods of anti-Jewish persecution. It began with the First Crusade, in which, on their way to the Holy Land, the Crusaders stopped to massacre Jewish communities in Worms, Speyer, and Mainz. Was the beginning of centuries of persecution, often in the name of religion. But he sees it as restraint, actually. In other words, out of the whole Haggadah, these are the only verses that talk that seem to be a little bit violent, but he doesn't see it as such. So, do we have a volunteer to read how he sees that paragraph? Anybody want to read, but without justice?
Okay, but without justice. Go on. But without justice, something fundamental is missing. Pour out your rage is not a call for vengeance. It is not a call to human action at all. It is rather a prayer for divine justice. At this point in the Seder, as we turn from the past to the future, We reflect on the tragedy of the Jewish people in the past, the many thousands and millions of our people who were murdered, sometimes in the name of the God of love. We ask God to reveal to us at the end of days the meaning of all this suffering. These verses are a cry of pain coming to us from one of the dark nights of the Jewish soul, as if to say, let us understand, one day, if not now, the justice of your world, O Judge of all the earth.
So that's how he interprets this passage. What do you think about his interpretation?
If that's what they wanted, why did they say that? Why does it say what it says?
Okay, so there's always in between the lines, there's the literal meaning of words, but then you have, especially in poetry and the Haggadah is basically a lot of poetry and a lot of in between the lines. I agree partially. I think it certainly comes from a place of pain, but to say that we want to one day understand it, I don't think so. I think it would be like saying for blacks, we want to understand one day, when in the end of days, or when the Messiah comes, why we suffered all of slavery, why we suffered from segregation. No, you suffer because people can be evil. That's why. You're not going to have this explanation one day as if it will all become clear why all this suffering happened. That part I don't buy. So so that's why I say I like what he says, that it's not vengeance, that it comes from a place of pain and suffering. But to think that one day we'll have an explanation, the explanation is what I said before. People are capable of doing. Yeah.
Maybe he's talking about Olam Haba, that will happen for us in the next world.
Maybe.
That there will be understanding.
Okay.
And you're not going to get it in this world.
In this world. Okay, interesting.
To me,
no, I think he's asking for justice in this world, but in the end of days would come the understanding. So
I don't think there's anything to understand. I'm saying it's like, what? There's anything to understand why we enslaved black people for so long? There's nothing to understand. We're capable of doing bad. The white people were, and they did it because they were capable.
okay,
They had
you
the
have
power.
the answer.
There's nothing. I don't think even black people want to understand one day, nothing. You see what I'm saying? It's evil happens in the world because people with power are capable of doing evil things, and when there's nobody to stop them, they will do it. And that's the farthest that I can find as an explanation. I mean, I understand Rabbi Sachs thinks that one day there will be a better explanation. I'm not persuaded.
But there are, and I consider them Michiganers. They may be Jewish Michiganers who believe that the Holocaust was the justice for Jews who had fallen away. I mean, we've all read things like that by, the crazies. So it's not just this. I mean, it's all over the place.
Yeah, that's why it's so dangerous. Yeah, I agree with you. It's very dangerous to think that there will be some rational explanation. Again, going back to that headline that I put there, don't do rationalization of evil.
To me,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, to me, Shemai, this is equivalent to when it says in the Torah you're supposed to take people who cheat in their marriage and take them out and stone them, and so the rabbis were, oh my God, so they tried to tone it down, and to me, Rabbi Sachs was embarrassed by all this stuff, and so he tried to change the meaning of it.
Interesting. Let's pick up on that. Embarrassed by that paragraph. So somebody was so embarrassed that look what he did. By the way, as a parenthesis, researcher Daniel Goldschmidt, I have his academic Haggadah almost. He brings all kinds of sources and analysis based on manuscripts. He says it's unrelated to the crusade. He dates it approximately to the same period of time, 11 something, but he says that it's not related to the specific massacres of the crusade, but rather since the Hallel deals with idol worshippers, and he goes back to the temple. In other words, he thinks that the evil talked about in this paragraph is the ones who destroyed the temple. Certainly the Psalms, the verses from Lamentations that we saw there, they're definitely not talking about crusades. The author of Psalms, the author of Lamentations, talked about the temple, the destruction of the temple. So since we are going to say Hallel, and Hallel talks about these idol worshippers, and they're the ones who destroy the temple, so we ask God to pour his wrath on them. So,
but aren't there many examples of very angry liturgy that was inspired in the Middle Ages? I mean, I can think of many of the piyutim that we do at Yom Kippur, the paragraph that we don't say or didn't used to say during Aleinu. I mean, the Middle Ages were rough.
yes, yeah. It's possible. So I can't decide between the two of them, between Goldschmidt and between the Koren Haggadah and Rabbi Sachs and others. It's a machlokas between researchers. I mean, they kind of agree on when it was added. They don't agree about what actually prompted it. So, but yeah, definitely there are other. So that would support the Rabbi Sachs' understanding, since there are other piyutim that were added specifically after the Crusades, maybe this one too. Okay, now let's see what happened to people who really were embarrassed by it. They found an alternate text called Shpokh Ahavatcha, pour your love. And you'll find it even in the Koren Haggadah online, in Rabbi Sachs' Haggadah, and even in the one called A Night to Remember, the Haggadah of Contemporary Voices. So what does it say? Any volunteer to read Pour Out Your Love?
Pour out your love on the nations who have known you.
Go ahead, Peter. Yes.
And the kingdoms who call upon your name. For they show loving kindness to the seed of Jacob, and they defend your people Israel from those who would devour them alive. May they live to see the sukkah of peace spread over your, the pictures of everybody cover the next line, over your chosen whatever.
Chosen ones, and to participate in the joy of your nations. Wow.
Thank you.
This is so positive. Why can't we just say this? If this is really also from the Middle Ages and from the manuscript found in the area of Germany called Worms, this is highlighting the fact that there were righteous among the nations throughout our history, and even during the Holocaust, who helped Jews, who saved Jews, who defended Jews from accusations. So, you know the idiom, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So, is this really a manuscript from 1521 that had this? And notice how it has the same rhythmic and poetic style. Instead of Shpokh Xamatcha, Shpokh Ahavatcha, and instead of the nations who have not known you, it's the nations who have known you. It's clearly built on the one that we do have in the Haggadah, right? On the negative one. And he turned it around and made it into a positive paragraph. Brilliant, don't you think? But like I said, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It is not from 1521. So how did this happen? Who made this claim that he found the manuscript from 1521? It's really quoted by a researcher called Chaim Bloch, who lived in the 20th century, in his book called, and we can look at his book even. Here's his book, Heichal something. Heichal. You can find almost everything online. Heichal Divrei Chazal. And you scroll down, and you see Shpokh Ahavatcha. Do you guys see it? Shpokh Ahavatcha l'goyim. And then he has an asterisk. And he says, I found this Haggadah of Pesach in the estate of, and I don't have the rest of the Hebrew, so I'll show you now what I put in the PowerPoint, because I read the rest of it. Where did he find it? Okay, so let's go back. He found it in the estate of somebody, of Rabbi Shimshon Wertheimer. And he had in his estate a magnificent handwriting and wonderful drawings on parchment. And this belonged to the state and was then given to one of Rabbi Shimshon Wertheimer's grandsons, who allowed Chaim Bloch to photograph the Haggadah. But guess what? He lost the whole Haggadah except for that paragraph, which he was able to copy from that Haggadah, which goes back all the way to 1521. And he points out that the Haggadah was written in Worms in the year 1521 by no less than the grandson of Rashi. And even though the photographs of the Haggadah were lost, the version of Shpokh Chamatcha remained in his handwriting, and he copied it, and that's where he saw these verses, pour out your love, that we just read. And what do we know about this Chaim Bloch? So this all comes from this Chaim Bloch. So I'm hesitant to use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is full of mistakes. So let's see what the National Library of Israel says about Chaim Bloch. So I want to show you what they say about this guy. Because he's the one. We only know from him. Okay, so you see, Hasifriya Leumit, it's a little bit more credible than Wikipedia. So this is what it says about Moshe Chaim Bloch, who lived from 1881 to 1873. And now let's go back and I'll translate it for you. What do we know about him? Apparently, he is a problematic figure. Wait. He was a researcher of Hasidism and Kabbalah and a writer who wrote in Hebrew, English, Yiddish, and German. He became known as a forger, and many of his books were disputed. So, you know, once a forger, always a forger. I don't buy it that this is a 1521 manuscript. He probably made it up, which begs the question, why didn't he just say, I prefer a different version, and here's what I wrote, and here are my reasons for saying it? Why? So, you know, this is reverse plagiarism. Because, you know, there's a lot in the media recently about plagiarism, right? All these people caught in scandals with plagiarism. But this is reverse. He actually probably wrote it himself. So it's not like you're taking somebody else's writing and taking credit for it. It's like you wrote something, but then you're attributing it to somebody who lived, you know, in the ancient past. So why do you think? Why did he do that? Why would a person do that? In the rabbinic world, what is the underlying assumption?
It gives it more heft, right?
Oh, so we have a problem in the rabbinic world. We often glorify ancient texts, and we discredit anything new. And so this Chaim Bloch, right, living in this world, thinks, oh, if I just say, I think we should say Shpokh Chamatcha, pour out your love, and it's a very nice prayer. Let's go back and read it again quietly, right? It's very beautiful. But he lives in a world where if you say that you wrote it, it'll be discredited. Nobody will pay attention to it. Nobody will say it. Nobody will publish it in Haggadahs, right? So he felt compelled to misattribute it to 16th century Worms, Haggadah that belongs to the grandson of Rashi, right? This whole elaborate scheme. And he's a victim of a world that doesn't appreciate the creativity of people. And I think it's a lesson. And this happens not in just the rabbinic world. So we don't have time today, but next week we'll see it happens in the musical world too. People who come up with great compositions, but then they misattribute it to somebody really famous, you know, like Mozart or Beethoven or Vivaldi, thinking, oh, nobody's going to play my piece if I said it. So I think that, you know, now the whole discussion is about whether it's a forgery or not, and it probably is. Instead, if it would have been just a straight person, honest person, and said, look, I don't like the fury and the vengeance and the wrath, and I've come up with a different text. So thankfully today, you know, in modern day, like, you know, now 21st century, we do have that. We have a lot of sidurim that add prayers, that add, and especially, you know, with the kidnapped people in Gaza. I've seen prayers that were added. I know in Princeton, my kids, they told me they got together, the board of the Koach Minyan there, and they drafted a text called a prayer for life. So today it's much more mekubal and acceptable to do it. I think this guy, Bloch, poor guy, right? He felt that he needs to come up with this whole elaborate, you know, that he found it in a manuscript, 1521, instead of just coming right out and saying, here's what I suggest, and then publish it. So I think this year we said both. We said both, because I think there's room for both. There's room for remembering all those who died in the Crusades and the Holocaust at the hands of other evil people. And for that, they deserve pour out your wrath. But also, we have to mention all the righteous among the nations who did save Jews, and we can say this prayer for them. So, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, your call.
Sure.
Thank you, Shmai.